Okay, so if we're going to implement this, we need to know how it works. And in Python, it's very easy to show inheritance. So in Python, if you want to show a class inherits from another, you just put the parent class in brackets. So for example, if we want to show that the user class inherits from the person class, then we just put class user person. Previously, we would have just said class user, and that would have defined the class. Here we're now saying class user brackets person to say that it inherits from the person class. And we can also make sure that we use methods from parents by using the super method. So if you recall, before we do that, if you recall that when we initialize an object in Python, we use the init method, the constructor, to do that, or Python uses the constructor to do that. We write the init method, Python uses it. If you want to use a method from a parent class, you can just prefix it with the word super, or the method super, and that will then get hold of the parent class and use the method from that. So if you want to use the constructor from the parent, just use super.init, and that will then use the init method from the parent. So let's see how we put that into practice. So those are the two things we're going to start with. So here's the 4 classes for the version 8 of the Uni app, which now uses inheritance. So previously, when we wrote this, we had 4 different files, each with 4 separate standalone classes. Now they are in 4 separate files, okay, but each file knows it all. Some of the files know about the other ones. In other words, the staff class down here knows about the user. The user knows about the person. This is the user class. It knows about the person. This is the staff class. It knows about the user. This is the student class knows about the user. So the person class is absolutely unchanged. All that does is just stores the name when we create a person object. But the user inherits from the person, and because we've said that it inherits from the person, so we have to import that class first of all, and then in order to use the init method from the person, we can just use super.init, and then that will use the init method in the person class. It doesn't save any lines of code actually in this case, because it's taking one line to replace another line, but it's still a useful thing to do, because if we change that later on, then the inheritance will make sure that the changes are inherited by these subclasses. Okay, now we can also see the staff and the student inherit from the user class. So class student inherits from user, and then they use the super.init to call the init method from the user, which then calls the init method from the person. So when I initialize a student object, it's actually using all 3 methods, because it inherits them and then uses the method from the superclass. So so far that hasn't really made much difference. We've still got 4 files, and we haven't really saved that much code, because actually those constructors are very simple. They're just storing a value about the name or the user ID. But now we've got the classes all related to each other, we can start to create useful methods. For example, in the latest version, UniApp 09, there's 2 new methods implemented in the person class, but because they're in the person class, as we saw, that's inherited by all the other classes. So all the other classes can use these methods. One is the print details method, which is just to print the user's details. And the other is the send method. Okay, a method to send a message to a user. Which, if you remember, this system is just a simulation. It doesn't actually send messages. It just prints out that a message has been sent. So let's have a look at the actual code for that. So if I go to UniApp 09, there's my person class. There's now quite a lot of code in there. There's these methods that I'm going to talk about. One I'll talk about in a minute. So print details and send. Okay, but the staff doesn't have much in it, and the student doesn't have much in it, and the user has even less in it, because they're all inheriting all that stuff from the person class. So whenever I want to print the details of an object, this is the method that gets used, and it's inherited by all those other classes. And how does it print it? It's just what I showed you a couple of weeks back, where it uses hasatra to find out if that object has a particular attribute, like a user ID, like a job, like a program. If it does, it prints it out. If it doesn't, it just ignores it. So this print details is quite generic in the sense that it's applied to all the objects, and it just looks at the object and sees whether it's able to do anything related to, say, the program or the modules. And I was going to show you a demo, so let me actually run it. So we'll go into Uni app, and let's put a breakpoint here. So we're going to debug this and see what happens. Okay, so let's run it. Debug this class, Uni app 09. Okay, so that starts running, and what it should do is print out the details of all the users. If you recall, that's what happens from the database. No, sorry, it's here, isn't it? Here it prints out. It reads in the database, gives an error message if it can't connect to the database. Then it prints out all the user details, which is what's just happened here. Okay, and then I've put a breakpoint in the click method because I want to see what happens when we click the send button. So there's my app. Let's pick a group of people we're going to send messages to. Let's say all the students. Okay, so we think, essentially we think we're going to be dealing with student objects, but we'll see. Let's just send them a hello message. Click send, and so I stop at the breakpoint. Okay. The group is the students, the message is hello, and then I loop. This is no different to before. I loop over all the users and decide whether to send them a message. So because the group is students, I check to see if this particular user, so the first user is a person, so that they're not going to get a message sent to them. And I check by looking at if that object, that user object, is an instance of the student class. They're not in this case, so they won't get a message. So we don't send them a message. I'm going to have to keep looping. You can see each time I go around the loop, the user changes. So this is staff, so they're not going to get a message either. Should have picked somebody else, some other group. Okay, now the user is a student object. You can see that PyCharm is telling me that. So when I go to the group of students and I check whether that object is a student, I should get, yes, it is. So we'll send a message. And so when we go to send message, I'm going to use user.send. So we're sending a message to this user. And I know that this object is a student. So in the past, I would have expected to drop into the student class. But if I'm now here, if I drop down into that method, you'll see it takes me into the person class. Okay, so this is a demo that actually the student object is inheriting from the person class. So in some ways that simplifies the writing of the code. In some ways it makes it slightly harder to think about because we've got a student object that's using code from another place. In this case, it's using it from the person class. But it's certainly, when you get to much more involved objects, it certainly saves lots of code writing and makes things simpler. Okay, I think I'm going to finish that video there, and then we'll look at the idea of taking this a bit further, of the topic of overriding methods.